Are you a scientist? Are you divergent? Are you just interested? Because today we're going to be learning about brain photography, which is really interesting. And we're going to be asking the same question we've been asking recently. Is it possible to diagnose autism without just observations? Can we do it from a more methodical way? This will be a very interesting one today, very science heavy, but very useful when we're understanding why we can't just take a picture of the brain and say autistic, and also why we might be able to in the future. Today, we are going to be having maybe a bit more of a focus on autism and ADHD, but honestly, maybe, just maybe, this will be able to apply to the whole spectrum of neurodivergent conditions. Yay, Louise loves these weekly webinars. It's my favorite day of the week, as well as Friday and Saturday and Sunday. Okay, so here we are. Oh, here's me. Yay, I actually know what I'm talking about. So for those of you who are new, here's my background. I'm currently doing my master's in neuroscience. I also support ND individuals every single day, and I'm obsessed with the brain. But I would love to know your insights today. So if any of you work in this field, if any of you have had some of these scans, please do share your experience. Oh, Vicky, you guys melt my heart. One of your favorite times. Now, here's our lovely team. Today, you've got myself in the chat, you've got April, and you've got our newest member of staff, Izzy, who isn't on here yet. Welcome, Izzy. Great to have you. Our last one we did was on biomarkers, and biomarkers was just a way of saying, is there a particular place in the human brain where we can pinpoint autism? And if any of you remember, was an X-ray a good biomarker? Well, kinda, but not really, because ultimately it comes down to our personal opinions. When we look at an X-ray, it still requires interpretation. But today, we are going to be looking at a little bit of AI magic. If we get computers to analyze X-rays, would that change the game? Would that then become less ambiguous? Possibly. Do check that out. Let's do autism neuroimaging. Now, I know I said autism here. Honestly, a lot of this applies to ADHD as well, and maybe some of the others. But because we're doing a bit of a deep dive in autism at the moment, that's why I'm continuing along that theme. Today's subject, nice and simple, brain imaging. How do we take a picture of the old noggin? A cheeky Polaroid, a DSLR, or some big fancier machines? There's multiple ways of taking pictures of the brain, and not all are created equally. It's not really like, oh, this one's better, this one's worse. It's like, which one for which potential moment. What I want to do is I want you to rank these disorders by their financial burden. Oh, now just so you know, this sounds horrible, but what we're actually talking about is the burden on the NHS. Now, if you're not in the UK, just any odd health system, which one do you think is costing the taxpayer the most money? I'm not having a go at people with any of these conditions, but some of them are pretty expensive. So rank them here, and we're going to be having a look at why are they so expensive? And is there a way of lowering the cost while also increasing the amount of care? Okay, at number 1, alcohol use disorder. Yep, alcohol is a pain in the bum for our health system, and that it costs a lot of money. Dementia, yeah. Depression, disease, heart disease, some I've never even heard of. But all of these do cost a lot of money. If you know about any study seeking participants in this area, would be interested to know. Well, I actually do have lots of emails all the time asking for participants. Don't mind if you're minding a guinea pig. Now, why did I ask you about this? Well, interestingly, 4 out of 5 disorders of the top disorders to burden society by the end of the decade will be brain disorders. Why is this a problem? If you look here, these are the ones which we currently are costing a lot of money, but by the end of the decade, we're talking neurological disorders like autism and ADHD, bipolar, schizophrenia. They are going to be causing the biggest strain potentially on, say, our health system. Now, this is big language, but why is this? Any ideas why this is going to be switching? And this was from The Who, not the band The Who, that would be better, but you get the idea. Because they cannot be cured, the cost is ongoing. Yeah, it is ongoing. Like, it's not a disease, it's just a way of thinking, but still requires support. More causes, being identified. Yes, we're getting better at identifying, there's becoming more awareness, it's going up. More people are being diagnosed with brain disorders. Yep, it's going up a lot. Research isn't finished. Treatments and experimentals are expensive. Yeah, we are learning more about it every day. And maybe with some of these, we are talking about brain imaging today after all, the better we get at diagnosing individuals, the higher likelihood we're going to see. And that's it. We, at the moment, do it with psychologists where they'll look at you and go, autism. It sounds like the sorting hat of Harry Potter, but actually it goes way deeper than that. Soon we'll be able to do scans, we'll be able to use AI, and it'll become a lot more easier to know definitively whether or not someone has a neurodevelopmental condition. Changes in society and demands on people make it more difficult for people with ND. Too many illegal substances out there. Well, I'm going to say no on that one, but it could actually, when we say, maybe we're talking more about neurodevelopmental, which means it happens from birth to later on. In terms of things you take later on, maybe not much on that one. But yeah, there are many reasons. Okay, we know more things are going on with the brain, but why aren't we able to really know if someone is neurodivergent just from a couple of operations? Well, a thing that we do is called biopsies, where we just, slice and dice and we try to look inside what's actually going on. But it doesn't really work with the brain. Nobody wants their brain sliced and diced. Honestly, this is what they did back in the day. I don't know why she's got a book on her head, but this guy is cutting his head open. And this was to relieve pressure in the brain. What we do, we'd remove tissue and then we'd put it under, a microscope and we'd examine it and we'd be able to diagnose it. But for obvious reasons, we can't do that with neurodivergent conditions because the brain, it would leave skin damage. It's just not great. The brain doesn't like being cut open, if at all possible. What do? We invent some fancy machines which allow us to see the brain without actually cutting it open. Drumroll, MRI, magnetic resonance imagery. Yeah. Have any of you ever had an MRI? Yeah? Oh, Emma, do you want to tell us what it was like? I'd love to know your experience.
It was on my knee when I was a teenager. I've got knee damage that they could never really work out the cause of, so they had to give me an MRI at one point, and it was really bizarre, just sort of lying there trying to be really still. But I was in there for ages, a good 40 minutes, I think, with this knock noise going the whole time. But I was lying there that long, I managed to find the blind spots in my eyes.
Oh, Vicky, I had one for my head migraines. I actually found it really relaxing, weirdly. Interesting. Now, only imaging reveals brain biology. This was just a quick one. Have you ever had an MRI? So click the thing if you had or you have not. Now, MRIs are really useful for looking inside the brain. It's a ways to break through the surface without actually breaking anything. Okay, some people have. Now, a while ago, we spoke about, well, if MRIs are good at showing us potential needs, why aren't we doing these for every single student? Comes down to money. It's expensive. Now, what do you think are the biggest advantages of an MRI? MRI is really high res. They're great. Who doesn't love a good MRI? You get a nice solid picture, but it isn't all sunshines and rainbows. Do you think the best thing about them, however, is that they're non-invasive, meaning that no one's cutting your brain open in order to have a look under the hood? Do you think that they're really detailed? You get some beautiful HD, 4K, crystal clear, you know exactly what's going on. Currently, there isn't any known health risks. Obviously you wouldn't want to do them all the time, but as we're aware, there's not. All right, let's have a look. Yes, I would say detailed imagery is a really good one. There are other scans, but they aren't as clear and they don't tell us as much information. But there are some cons. And again, they are expensive. Ideally, most neurodivergent people would ideally be able to have an MRI. And I think it could tell us quite a lot about their neurology. And as we've already learned previously, there are brain differences in autistic individuals. For instance, the brain is technically bigger with the amount of white and grey matter. Which one here? This is a nice little image. Which one shows sclerosis? And this was from an MRI. Taking a look at this, which one, the blue or the red, you think is showing some sclerosis on the hippocampal? And this was related to epilepsy. We can literally, does the person have epilepsy? Well, obviously we can observe epilepsy, but what happens if someone is actually having a fit? if we do a scan, we can actually see the likelihood. Let's have a look. It is the red one. And if you can see, the biggest difference is it is small. It is noticeably different. But yeah, scans in this instances are really beneficial. But what about autism? Can we do such a scan for autism? Is it going to be as obvious? Probably can guess it's not going to be as obvious, but maybe there are signs, and maybe those signs are micro that we can't observe them yet. But could a computer do it if it had enough data and enough previous ones to view? This is an example of how we might do it for ADHD. Let's see if we can do just a quick little view. Okay, yeah, come on. Oh, some nice little graphics. Okay, it's showing us a little bit about the brain. Yep, we've got different little lobes here. Let's get to the interesting stuff. Okay, here. We can actually do a scan of the brain, and it essentially slices it into tiny little chunks, and you're able to see quite a lot of detail, to be honest. Here is a non-ADHD brain. Oh, wow, everything seems to be working. We have a good amount of thickness. Everything looks how it's meant to. But let's go to a nice ADHD brain. Oh, and now we are noticing that it is developing differently. So ideally, you would have brain scans throughout your young childhood, and you'd be able to see how things are developing, how they are growing, are they forming how you would expect them to? As you can see, it is possible to do it, but sometimes one individual scan isn't going to be enough. You have to show the narrative. You have to show like the pattern. Now let's move on to something we call a CT scan, or sometimes just called a CAT scan. They are computed axial tomography. Sorry, I really struggle pronunciation, but you'll know that if you're a regular. X-rays for detailed cross-sections. They're faster and they're good for bones. A good CT scan. Have anyone ever had a CT scan or a CAT scan? I'd love to know your experience. What was it looking like?
Yeah, it's the round thing like that goes over. You have had it on my lungs. I got damage in my lungs. It's extremely noisy, and it goes like up. The sound is awful. It goes up and down, up and down. And they do speak to you. On my case, being lungs, they tell you behind the glass or behind the other room where they're looking at the computer screen, they're telling you how to breathe, when not to breathe, hold, take big breaths, so because being lungs. So, and it's sort of, but I found it as the thing goes over you, kind of comes towards you, I found that a bit daunting, and the noise is absolutely horrendous.
Thanks for saying that. And I think that's really interesting because while CT scans do have a lot of benefits and they're a lot quicker, they are really noisy. And imagine if you have autism and you already have high sensitivity needs. A CT scan or a CAT scan is X-rays for detailed cross-sections. It's just a different part of the brain. It's fast, it's good for bones. MRI, however, is a magnetic field for soft tissue imagery. Perfect for the brain because the brain is soft tissue. Essentially, the type of density does make a difference on the type of scan. There's no radiation, which is lovely, and preferred for neurological and soft tissues. You ideally do not want to be shooting radiation at the brain. But for the bones, a little bit of radiation amongst friends, no big deal. But ideally, you wouldn't want to have these type of scans all the time because obviously radiation is bad in large amounts. I want you to tell me if you think it's an MRI scan or a CT scan. Again, CT, CAT scan, they use very interchangeably. I personally prefer CAT scan because it's got cat in the name. Which one? And remember, I've already given you the answers to these. This is a good test. High-res images for soft tissues and organs. Am I talking MRI or am I talking CAT? No, I'm using radiation. Ooh, which one did I say doesn't have radiation? Preferred for neurological conditions or useful for fractures and trauma cases? So let's see. Yes, MRI does have the best resolution and really great for a nice bit of tissue and organs, things that we definitely don't want to expose to radiation. No ionizing radiation. Well, I would say that MRI, cats do have a little bit of radiation, but maybe less so. Preferred for neurological conditions, absolutely MRI, and useful for fractures and trauma cases, yes. Indigo says, I've had quite a few MRI scans for migraines, very noisy and required sedation. That is another interesting one as well. As you can see here, pros and cons. One isn't necessarily better than the other. It just depends on the circumstances. You can see here, one of them shows you less detail but it's much more defined for bones. But the other one shows much better for soft tissue. Now, which one here, again, fingers crossed, I've already given you the answer, do you think is an MRI scan? Yes, you all got it right already. The first one is a CT scan, and you aren't getting much detail here at all. But if all you want to see, if there's a crack in the bone, perfect. Got a broken head, that's going to show you. But if you want to look about the actual tissue in the brain, that is when an MRI scan is going to come in handy. Honestly, the difference is night and day. They're different. But one is arguably, actually, they're both a bit loud and annoying, but one is way, way more expensive. You can probably guess which one. What do you think are the downsides of MRI? Why aren't we using it every 5 seconds? If it's good at images, I mean, I love going to a photo booth and getting a cheeky selfie. Why would I want to have an MRI? I'd love to see my brain and see how it develops. You go to the opticians, don't you, when to be yearly, and just get an idea of how your eyes are progressing. Why aren't we doing the same for our brains? It makes the most sense. Because they are expensive. Yep, there is high demand. There are so many people that need MRI scans, and we do not have enough of them. They are very noisy. You know, where are you going to put it? In the cupboard? You're going to need special facilities. You can't use metal. Yet, not everyone would be appropriate if you've got a metal somewhere in your head or body. Claustrophobic, yes, they are tight. A lot of people describe us being in a coffin. I don't know how they would know that. This is an image of one that broke. That's unlikely. It happens, but not that regular. But there are lots of reasons why we aren't using these all the time. Not enough staff. Yes, you need professionals in order to use them. Weight limit. Yep, they're only a certain size. Not enough staff. Yeah, can't use cold. Oh, are they cold? Okay. Yeah, I didn't know that. Like really cold? You can't wear it. No, can't be that bad. Expensive. Okay. Some of the downsides. Let's do the spinny wheel of negativity. Noise. They are incredibly noisy. A lot of people can't hack it, and I don't really blame them. Cold to keep the magnets from overheating. Oh, thanks, Laura. Yes. It does require a lot of energy as well. They're very energy intensive. Not cheap things to run, let alone buy. And we've got accessibility. Where are they? I don't know where my local one is. A lot of people have to literally travel to go to a special hospital in order to use one. You're not going to have these at every little clinic. Ideally, that would be great. Just pop down to your local GP. That's not how it is at the moment. So when we look at the sheer amount of people who are neurodivergent to the amount of scans equipment we have available, it doesn't really add up. Oh, certain hospitals can only have certain specialist MRI scanners. Absolutely, Laura. Vicky, I only had one because I was fortunate enough to have private healthcare through my work. Yeah, they're hard to get hold of. They really do cost an arm and a leg. And this is on continuous costs as well. What else do we have? Time. Yep, they are time consuming. You know, the waiting list is long. They take a while to do. It's not as quick and simple as, say, an EEG, which will go on shortly. And the last one is tiny little spaces. Lots of people hate tiny spaces, particularly if you're neurodivergent. It might be even more overwhelming. Free in Canada? Oh, Canada. I mean, it's technically free here. It's just the waiting list is horrendous. There are some other difficulties, particularly when we're talking about autism. So let's say children, they struggle a lot. They're all wiggling and all over the place. They can't stay still. That will result in a bad scan. Which one of these scans do you think is showing a child who may struggle staying still? I had to edit this quickly last night because typical dyslexic, I put children may snuggle staying still. They're not snuggling with the MRI. But as you can see, oh yeah, you got it. This one, see this image, it's not very sharp. There's not much clarity. This one, far much easier. And if people are moving around too much, you're going to get a bad image. You can't tell anything from this image. You really do want a nice, crisp, clear image. And that only works if you can keep someone still. So what do we do? Sedate them. Well, not really, because if we want to see the brain in action, we want it to be working exactly how we'd imagine. When you sedate it, the brain doesn't work exactly the same. And obviously risk. Vicky felt rather snug. Well, I'm glad you did. Reminds me of the big squeeze machine invented by Temple Grandin, which hugs you and you feel all comforting. Each to their own though. MRI is not limited to just looking at structure and pathology. It can also be used to look at brain chemistry, how the brain is firing, what's going on when we're talking about our neurons, these synapses, these neurotransmitters, its effects on drugs. You could see how the drug is flowing through the body. When you do that experiment where you get like, I don't know, some like colorful liquid, you put it into water and you watch how it dispenses like that, you want to see how it will flow around the brain. The wiring of how the brain and how it matures. So, is it strong? Do they have strong connections? Are they more activated when you have certain inputs or stimuli? This machine can do all of that. And all of these things do relate to neuro. A new scan for all seasons adjusts contrast between brain tissues, facilitating data, pooling cross scans and subjects. What do I mean by this? If any of you do photography, you'll know like high dynamic range, where essentially you'll have a photo where you'll have like the foreground nice and bright and exposed, and the background will be darker, and you'll have another image which reverses it, and then the computer will combine the two to make sure your picture is perfectly composed and it has really good dynamic range. These scans also do a similar thing. They make sure that they'll use a combination of scans and join them together in order to get really great detail. While at the moment, we can't look at a scan and just say, hello, I reckon that section there, that's a little bit of ADHD right there. That's not how it works. But as scans get better, we are able to see the nuances between slight variations. And if we say we have like thousands of scans or people with autism, are we able to work out some areas which there's some more overlap? At the moment, we can normally tell through like grey and white matter, but it's not like 100%. And typically, it's just through early adolescence as the brain is developing. Oh, April said, I think Temple invented the squeeze machine for cattle. You're right, April. She did for cattle, but then she started using it on autistic children. Sorry, she wasn't treating us like cattle, but it was just that it made them feel snug and comfortable. On here, which one do you think is a 22-week-old brain? And this is going to be useful to look at the differences in brains. Because we know autism and ADHD are neurodevelopmental, meaning that they start in the womb or early adolescence, and we see the most substantial change of the brain early on. So if we are able to scan the brain, are we able to detect it? Oh, I can see it's a lot of variation here. Let's have a look. It is the last one. And as you can see, actually it's hard to tell, isn't it? But you can see it actually goes backwards in terms of how they're growing. So different brains at different stages of development do look a certain way. The more knowledge you have exactly how a brain is meant to look at what particular stage of development, the more you'll know if something is going right or not going to plan. Let's look at the future of neuroimaging. This is where it gets exciting. Because up to now, I've just spoken about how we should use it, but we can't. But what about the future? Are things going to get more exciting? Yeah, absolutely. Machine learning. If any of you are into AI, machine learning, this is essentially when you have a lot of data, you give it to the machine and then it learns on its own. It's like, it'll try different routes and it's like, yep, that route doesn't work. It'll try another route, doesn't work. And it'll keep going until it finds the absolute perfect route. Modern tech like pattern recognition and machine learning is now being applied in healthcare. A new subject can be compared to the existing database, allowing us to predict whether or not they have the disorder. So let's say you have an image of the brain. A medical professional could look at that image and they could be like, yeah, I can't tell the person has autism or not. However, a psychiatrist has looked at them, looked at their characteristics and said, this person is diagnosed with autism. So we get loads of psychiatrists to have like diagnosis of everyone. We take individual scans of every single brain and we compare them. Now we tell the computer, hey computer, all of these images are of individuals who have been diagnosed with autism. And then we give them a load of other images. All of these images are brain images of individuals who have not been diagnosed with autism and do not have autism as far as we are aware. Then it will do machine learning to go, like find the pattern. And it will do it to try and find exactly where there's overlap and where there's not overlap. So when we show them a new bunch of images that have not been categorized, that is when it'll be able to say whether or not you have autism or whether you do not. And we're at the early stages at the moment, but I think the efficiency at the moment has been like 90% accurate, which is amazing. This really is possible. Now, these differences, human beings aren't able to see them, but computers, because they can literally go to like such small detail, they're able to find these patterns. You've got your brain data, then you do some data analysis. Yeah, looking at the modeling, how things are, the axis, what's the coloring, the difference. Then we use some neural network models. And this is where we do that, like if A, then B, if B, then C. And it goes back and forth until it finds some overlapping consistency. And then we have a brain-inspired AI model. It really is quite interesting. Obviously, it opens up a whole can of ethical worms on whether or not we want to. And what happens to those of us who resonate with being neurodivergent and aren't officially diagnosed? It then becomes harder to say, oh, I resonate with that. You either are or you aren't. Where at the moment, it's more of a blurred line. Oh, Anna has said, what scan would be the best to check a brain development in autistic child if we were to get an idea of the degree of impairment? Or would it be best to wait until they are older and the brain is fully developed? Oh, good question, Anna. Well, an MRI would probably be best for this because it's better for soft tissue. It also can show a number of things, such as how the brain is working in action or in vitro, which is when you're alive. And ideally, you'd want to do it during development because that is when you can see the differences. It's a bit like if you go for an eye test, it doesn't tell you much. But if you go for an eye test 1 year and an eye test next year, you are evaluating the differences. Are the eyes staying relatively the same, or are they getting dramatically worse, or have they even improved? And depending on that, you'll know whether or not you need to take action. So ideally, it would be in adolescence. When the brain is already developed, not really much you can do. But when you're younger, maybe there are things that can help support. But can machine learning be used to diagnose ASD? Now, in theory, yes, but we aren't quite there yet. As I said, we need a group of healthy people or people who do not have ASD. We compare them with ASD. We have different patients, and then we use an algorithm to tell the difference. As you can see here, we've got images of neurotypical and neurodivergent. We've got some really smart machine doing all the training and learning. And when we talk, like, the more data we have, the more accurate this will be. At the moment, it's not easy to get a whole database of autistic brain images. But if we can get a big enough database, then it looks at the brain, see all these brains, and it will say, okay, well, that one looks like it has autism. That one looks like it has autism. And then we'll look at it and say, actually, that one we know that does, that one doesn't. And then essentially we reward it. Every time it's right, well done, computer. Every time it's wrong, bad computer. And it will keep sorting them until it gets more and more and more accurate. Now, we aren't at the stage where this will replace traditional diagnosis by any means, but there is definitely a lot of promise here. Now, I would love to know your personal opinions. Are you pro autodiagnosis or against autodiagnosis? Because I could see both arguments, to be honest. Yeah. Here's the thing on the top here. This study here in 2010 were able to use autodiagnosis with 90% accuracy for a 5-minute scan. That's ridiculous. 5 minutes, and they got 90% accurate on whether or not someone had ASD or not. This could be done in schools. Think about the future. Like, you could have like an MRI machine in a school, and they could exactly find out which students might require extra support early on and make sure they have the support. Because, you know, when you're starting off at school, everyone's all in the same sets, but you'd be able to find out right then. Most of you are for, some of you are against. And I said, like, the reason for is get support early on. The reason why you might be against it, however, is it might, it others us too much. You go from, we're all different in our own unique way, to, no, you definitely are different. You are definitely normal. And you can see why this could be a little bit unhealthy. We've also got a social element to look at this as well. So what does it, we got a little quote here. Oh, this isn't fixed to ASD. Structural imaging and analysis can also predict dementia. We've also got another 90% accuracy. Combining these measures can predict conversion to Alzheimer's 2 years in advance. And this, why am I talking about Alzheimer's now? Just because there isn't many studies on autism around this area, but this does show you the potential. Let's say you do not currently have Alzheimer's, and then you have Alzheimer's. what happened? Because someone will do a scan, they'll look at the brain, doesn't look like you have Alzheimer's, come back later. You come back a few years later, well, yeah, you now have Alzheimer's, it's too late, we can't do anything about it. And that's because our eyes can only see much, but there are minute differences which our eyes can't see, but a computer can see. If you had a scan, the computer would be able to say, you might not have Alzheimer's just yet, but you have really, really early signs that eventually you will have Alzheimer's in 2 years' time. And maybe you'd want to know that. Maybe you wouldn't want to know that, but it would give you options. My question to you is, you will develop Alzheimer's in 2 years. Would you want to know? It's going to happen whether or not you like it or not. That is not your choice. But your choice is whether or not you know if you get to find out or if you never want to find out. Okay, a lot of you would want to find out. Well, actually, none of you wouldn't. I've asked this question to other people and it's a tough one because maybe I wouldn't want to find out. I just want to live my best life. I don't want to think about it. But on the other hand, if you do know, you can make sure your treatment is your choice. You can make sure you can jot your ideas down. You can sort your affairs in order. You have more autonomy. Because quite often when you get Alzheimer's, the scary thing is you don't know what is happening and people are making choices on your behalf. This could be a really great thing. And I know Alzheimer's is very different from autism, but ultimately it is changes in the brain development. Alzheimer's typically happen later in life, where autism happens really early in life. They're not too dissimilar in terms of the fact that we are monitoring different changes in brains, and it is something you can visibly see, but computers are far better at visibly seeing than we are. Oh, we need social norms that value everyone as equal. Yes, Louise, I do agree. So some key takeaways from today is MRI in autism scans can study the brain structure maturation. MRI scans are really good. They have so much promise and potential, and they could do a number of things. Monitoring development, MRI can track brain developments in disorders like ASD. Remember, it is a neurodevelopmental, meaning it develops. It's not like yes, no, binary. It develops over time. That time might be relatively short in your early years of being born, but it is something that develops. It is something we'd be able to track. And it would work in autism, it'd work in ADHD. It could probably work in dyslexia, dyspraxia, why not, even though they are slightly different. Machine learning use can distinguish between healthy people and those with ASD. Now, FYI, I don't like the term, like people with autism aren't healthy. That's not what I'm saying. But from a clinical perspective, this is what they might look. When we say healthy, we're saying those who do not have autism to those who do. But essentially, you would be able to see it. No longer would you need to have someone who takes an educated guesstimate almost. Because at the moment, psychiatry, what we do, we have a list. And we're like, yep, no, yep. And everyone has their own opinions. Someone who might be reclusive to you might come across quite social to someone else. Whereas when you're looking at data, those ones and zeros do not lie, as long as you have good data. Diagnostic accuracy, a 5-minute MRI scan with machine learning could diagnose with 90% accuracy for autism. That is insane. That's way more accurate than psychiatry and how we currently do it. But obviously, we aren't there yet because it costs a lot of money and it just isn't accessible. The future is promising, but we're not quite there yet. If any of you would love to learn more, like, hey, now, where are you getting this information from? Here are some lovely places where I recommend you can explore further. Do check it out in your own time. But before we finish, any other questions around this exciting emerging area? Or
Can we see that slide again, please?
Yeah, sure, Anna.
Sorry, Mr. Far. I just want to take a picture. Thank you.
Yeah, take a nice picture. Some of these, they're quite scientific studies. And what I will say is, if you don't understand them, do not worry. You're not meant to understand them. These are like crazy amounts of research over many, many years. However, the very first part of each of the papers are really useful. Though I didn't put the authors in here, normally if you just put the date and the title, you will find them quite easily. But yeah, any last questions? All right, I'm happy enough with that. Everyone's minds have been absolutely blown. Oh, if you don't understand, you can ask AI to summarize the paper for you, lol. Yes, Claire, you can actually do that as well. What you can do is you can either copy and paste, or you can take the link, you can put it in AI and say, AI, too long, don't want to read it. What does it say? And it's very useful. Oh, thanks and tips. I always read the summaries / discussions at the end of the studies. Yeah, you honestly don't need to read them all. Now, the next webinar, we are looking at how do we teach neurodivergent students? And this is where we're looking at how we can actually use this data. Today, we spoke a lot about how do we photograph the brain and how do we apply that to autism. We are going to be looking at how do we take this newfangled technology, such as using MRI scans in order to say whether or not someone is neurodivergent, and how do we apply that to the education system. So this next week is very much going to be looking at the possibilities of how we can transform the education system for neurodivergent children. We're not quite there yet, but the possibility is there. And I think it'll be quite an exciting one. If we can get funding for it, the possibilities are honestly limitless. And it means that everyone gets the support they need, regardless of gender, sex, religion, orientation. You know how we often talk about ADHD and how it demonstrates very differently in women? Well, this technology isn't going to care whether you're male or female. It's going to know if you have ADHD regardless. So it's a very exciting time. If you thought this was cool, I'd love to watch it again. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel and view, some lovely little videos. Do check them out because April edits them every week and there's much more content to go over. You can look at where we're getting the information from. Quick comment before we finish. Thanks, Nat. Love the webinars. Love having you, Louise. Laura says, I'm healthy and see my autism as a difference rather than an impairment or disorder. I understand that healthy is just a word, that it's important that autistic people are not seen as unhealthy as is inaccurate and disparate. Thanks for the webinar. I think maybe it's just not for me. You know what, Laura? That's completely fine. And just, as an organization, we're a very strength-based approach. A lot of these words are what we use in the scientific community, but from a societal perspective, I am completely and utterly with you. I think autism is a different way of thinking and processing the world. But ultimately, there is a difference. And if we understand that difference, we might be able to implement support more early on. Do not get me wrong, this isn't about finding a cure. Why would we want to cure diversity? Diversity is what spurs innovation. But to say there aren't any struggles attached to it would be a disservice. I think it is, a delicate balance and finding that perfect point. But I appreciate your comment, definitely. Oh, yes, so Claire, just such exceptional individuals, and it should come up on the YouTube channel. Oh, Zia, thanks for a lovely webinar. I have severe brain MRI scans. Is there any info on how to see my neurodivergence? Not yet, unfortunately. Good question. Even if you have loads of images, you would need to have a lot more. The machine learning is very much beta testing at the moment. I don't have access to it. We're not there yet. It's possible though in the future. But yeah, I would love to see it if I could. And here's our contact details if you're interested, want to find out more. Oh, Claire, I wonder if there are any studies comparing girls and boys with ASD and their brains as they present differently. Do you know what, Claire? I don't know any off the top of my head, but if not, that's definitely an area where more research will be happening. As someone who is currently doing research at the moment, these ideas are really interesting, but having access to these MRI machines, even for people who are doing research, is really expensive. Imagine the cost of being able to scan boys and girls who have been diagnosed with autism and those who have not been diagnosed with autism. And ideally, you'll need hundreds of them for that data to be even worthwhile. That is costing an insane amount of money. At the moment, it is the financial cost which is stopping the research from progressing. But hopefully these costs will go down in time, like most things do. It will become more and more possible. Oh, Satu, this was my first webinar. Really enjoyed it. A bit fast for me, but support finding it if autistic. Well, do you know what, Satu? If it was a bit fast, I apologize. There's a lot of information to get through in a short amount of time, but we do have these all recorded. And what I like to do is, change the speed. You can pause, you can stop it, and hopefully it will make it a little bit more accessible. But I definitely take that on board. And we'll try and break it down a bit further. I think I always try to squeeze a lot into an hour, but duly noted. Do check this out, everyone. Oh, and if any of you do want some further reading, all those papers I recommended, honestly, are a little bit intense, but this book called Neuroethics, Anticipating the Future is one which I've actually genuinely enjoyed reading. It talks about how these scans might implement into the future. Where one of you spoke about the ethical considerations, we should ideally learn about or think about the ethical side before it's actually happened. There's no point creating the Terminator and then wondering what went wrong. We need to think early on, and then we can make informed decisions and policies before we reach that plateau. Oh, yeah, don't worry. Maybe I'll make the interactive thing more obvious next time, but appreciate everyone. Hopefully come again, Claire, and I would love to see you again, Tattoo. Well, yeah, and April normally edits the webinars in less than an hour. If you did find it quite a lot when we do the editing, we slice and dice them up to make sure that it's nice and you have only the good stuff. All right, lovely stuff. We are done for the day, but I really hope you found it useful. And do come for next week, because next week we're going to be putting this theoretical idea into practice. How will this impact the education system? So do check it out. Oh, thank you everyone for the lovely comments. Always an absolute pleasure to have everyone. But I hope you found it useful and see you next week. Happy Thursday, everyone. Been an honour too.